and welcome back to the history of the Mongols. I'm your host Kyle. In our previous episode, we concluded with the death of Genghis Khan in August 1227. Following his passing, 2 years were dedicated to organising his elaborate funeral rites, allowing the princes to return to Mongolia and preparing for the succession and coronation. Tolui, Genghis Khan's youngest son, served as regent during this interregnum. Despite some rumours of tension, there was little genuine doubt regarding the designated successor. Genghis Khan himself had explicitly selected Ogedei, his third son, to succeed him. Challenging his will would have been inconceivable. As the Persian historian Giovanni documented in the 1250s, Genghis Khan declared, "If it is your wish to pass your lives in ease and luxury and to enjoy the fruits of sovereignty and wealth, my advice, as I have lately given you to understand, is that Ogedei should ascend the throne of the Khanate in my place because he stands out amongst you for the excellence of his firm counsel and the superiority of his perspicacious understanding, and that the government of the army and the people and the defence of the frontiers of the empire should be executed by his auspicious advice and good counsel. I therefore make him my heir and place the keys of the empire in the hands of his valour and ability." His sons responded by kneeling in acceptance, acknowledging, "Who hath the power to oppose the words of Genghis Khan, and who the ability to reject it?" In a symbolic act of submission, they removed their hats and belts. Chagatai grasped Ogedei's right hand, Temuge his left, and they placed him onto the throne, while Tolui ceremonially handed him a cup, indicating unity among the key figures. The assembly then knelt 3 times before Ogedei, proclaiming, "May the kingdom prosper by his being Khan." Afterward they exited the tent, knelt thrice to the sun, and re-entered to celebrate. Ogedei thus became ruler of the Mongol Empire, adopting not his father's simple title of Khan, but the more prestigious Turkic title Kak Khan, meaning Khan of Khans. But who exactly was Ogedei? Born in 1186 as the third son of Genghis Khan and his principal wife Borte, Ogedei was 43 when he ascended to leadership. Though he lacked the exceptional military prowess of his brothers, he was well known for his generosity, diplomatic skills, and, notably, his fondness for alcohol. Unlike his more uncompromising brothers, Ogedei was flexible, favouring compromise and reconciliation. His approach significantly contributed to stabilising the expansive and diverse empire his father had created. One of Ogedei's lasting contributions was the establishment of Karakorum as the empire's administrative capital in the Orkhon Valley of Mongolia. He embarked enthusiastically on administrative reforms, not just refining, but essentially founding a structured bureaucracy and tax system to manage the vast territories effectively. Islamic historians generally portrayed Ogedei more favourably than his brother Chagatai, recounting anecdotes, some of uncertain authenticity, of him intervening to spare Muslims facing severe punishment for violating laws such as bathing in rivers, which had been strictly forbidden by Genghis Khan. Nevertheless, Ogedei was far from a pacifist. Under his leadership, the Mongol conquests vigorously continued. He directed the campaigns that annihilated the Jurchen Jin Dynasty, subdued the remaining Khwarezmian resistance, and propelled Mongol forces deep into Europe by the 1240s. Like his father, Ogedei was capable of severe and ruthless acts. Notorious examples include sending 40 virgins to accompany Genghis Khan in the afterlife, ordering a brutal assault against women of the Oirat tribe, and overseeing widespread destruction in China. Towards the latter part of his reign, Ogedei increasingly succumbed to excessive drinking, withdrawing from active governance and leading to his sudden death in December 1241. However, in 1229, Ogedei was an energetic, determined ruler, keen to secure his legitimacy and build upon his father's formidable legacy. He was not only faced with consolidating the enormous empire, but also establishing sustainable governance structures beyond military occupation. Until that point, the empire's civil administration had been subordinate to military needs. Generals like Mukhali in northern China from 1218 to 1223 concurrently held military and civil authority. Due to continuous warfare, civil matters often became secondary, subjecting local populations to arbitrary demands by occupying generals whose primary concern was supporting military campaigns or personal enrichment. Genghis Khan himself had never implemented a systematic taxation structure. Taxes were collected in kind, based solely on the immediate needs of the Mongol military, whether livestock, weapons, iron tools, or food supplies. These collections were sporadic, arbitrary, and deeply exploitative, leaving the local populations vulnerable to constant requisitions and hardship beyond the initial conquest. Ogedei's challenge, therefore, was not merely to maintain the empire, but to transform it into a sustainable political entity with clearly defined administrative practices and stable taxation policies. Upon ascending the throne, Ogedei immediately faced several pressing issues. Chief among these were managing the large sedentary populations of northern China and Transoxania, completing the conquest of the Jin Dynasty, and quelling the remaining resistance from the remnants of the Khwarezmian Empire. The Jin Dynasty, though diminished, remained entrenched behind the significant defensive barrier of the Yellow River, led by capable generals who mounted a determined resistance. Simultaneously, in western Iran, Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, the son of Khwarezm Shah Muhammad, had returned from exile in India, rallying support with the intention of restoring his father's empire. Recognizing these threats, Ogedei convened a council upon his ascension in late 1229 to determine appropriate courses of action. The necessity for new military campaigns was clear. Chormakun Noyan, a respected commander from the imperial bodyguard, was entrusted with a substantial force to eliminate Jalal al-Din and bring Iran under firm Mongol control, a campaign we will address in greater detail in future episodes. Meanwhile, the Jin dynasty in China, despite its reduced size, remained resilient, even regaining some territories during Genghis Khan's prolonged absence. A final decisive assault against the Jin was inevitable, though challenging due to their strong defensive positions, including the natural barriers provided by the Yellow River in the north and the heavily fortified Tongguan Pass guarding the west. Moreover, the southern Song dynasty, though historically antagonistic to the Jin, maintained neutrality, complicating Mongol strategy. The meticulous planning behind this ultimate campaign against the Jin dynasty will be discussed in depth in our next episode. Another critical issue discussed at Ogedei's council was how to manage the extensive sedentary populations, especially those in northern China, already under Mongol occupation. A radical faction within the Mongol leadership, represented by General Beja, proposed a drastic solution: the complete extermination of the northern Chinese population to transform their agricultural lands into pastures for Mongol horses. However, this genocidal proposal faced significant opposition, notably from the influential scholar and administrator, Yelu Chucai. Yelu Chucai was a prominent Khitan official, a semi-nomadic people culturally related to the Mongols, who had once governed China under the Liao dynasty before being displaced by the Jurchen Jin. While the Khitans had largely adopted Chinese customs over centuries, many maintained a distinct identity and sided with the Mongols during Genghis Khan's invasion. Yelu Chucai entered Mongol service in 1218, quickly gaining respect for his impressive stature, deep voice, distinctive long beard, and pronounced loyalty, a trait highly valued by Genghis Khan. After surviving the brutal siege of Zhongdu, Chucai immersed himself in Buddhist studies for 3 years, deepening his humanitarian outlook before being summoned to serve the Mongol court. He accompanied Genghis Khan westward into Khwarezm, gaining further respect as an astrologer, advisor, and scribe. Chucai strongly opposed Beja's proposal, not from an appeal to moral or humanitarian concerns, which he knew would be ineffective, but rather through a practical economic argument. He reasoned that the mass extermination of the Chinese population would yield a single finite reward, while establishing a regular, structured taxation system would provide continuous and long-term revenue with significantly reduced risk. Ogedei found this economic reasoning compelling, allowing Chucai to implement his proposals through the newly created Branch Secretariat for China. Simultaneously, a parallel administrative structure, the Branch Secretariat for the Islamic regions under Mongol control, was established, headed by Mahmud Yalovak, a Turkic merchant previously involved in diplomatic missions to Muhammad Khwarezm Shah in 1218. Like Chucai, Yalovak implemented structured tax reforms tailored to local Islamic traditions, achieving immediate success and receiving strong endorsement from Ogedei. Under Yelu Chucai's guidance, the Chinese Secretariat adopted a taxation system aligned with traditional Chinese administrative practices, collecting taxes based on households, with differentiated rates for urban and rural populations. Centralizing and standardizing tax collection significantly increased revenues by curbing arbitrary exactions by local officials and Mongol princes. Ogedei expanded Chucai's authority, allowing him to undertake substantial administrative reforms, including recruiting former Jin officials to rebuild and stabilize northern China, curtailing the power of monasteries, and imposing fiscal responsibilities on monastic enterprises. Chucai's ultimate ambition was to restore Confucian principles of governance, aiming to alleviate the harsh impact of Mongol rule and promote long-term economic and social recovery. Notably, he even convinced Ogedei to authorize a census, a decision Chucai would later come to regret, an issue we will examine in future episodes. Much of Ogedei's early reign involved ongoing conflict with the Jin Dynasty, culminating in their defeat by 1234, a significant milestone that reinforced Ogedei's legitimacy and allowed him to emerge from the shadow of his father. By 1235, preparations began for a major westward invasion, targeting regions that had previously confronted Mongol forces, such as the Rus, Cuman Kipchaks, and Volga Bulgars, who had resisted Mongol expansion during the earlier expeditions of generals Jebe and Subutai. This campaign was driven by an increasingly firm belief among the Mongols in their destined global dominance. Any group that resisted Mongol demands for submission, or even succeeded temporarily against Mongol forces, was perceived as directly challenging the divine order. Furthermore, the Song dynasty's attempt to seize territories formerly controlled by the Jin dynasty inadvertently positioned southern China as another target of future Mongol conquest, extending Mongol ambitions even further southward. These developments underscored the continuing aggressive expansion of the Mongol Empire under Ogedei's rule, shaping the geopolitical landscape of Eurasia for decades to come. During Ogedei's reign, the Mongol Empire rapidly expanded year by year. Rather than overwhelm a single episode with the details, we'll examine these developments region by region. To manage this growth, Ogedei introduced several key administrative innovations. One of the most important was the expansion of the Yam system, a relay-based courier network that dramatically improved communication across the empire. Comparable to the American Pony Express, though far more durable, the Yam network, initially limited to Mongolia under Genghis Khan, was extended by Ogedei into northern China, former Karakorum territory, and the lands conquered from the Khwarezmians. This ensured that even the empire's most distant regions remained tied to the central administration. The system relied on a series of relay stations, spaced roughly a day's ride apart. Messengers could stop to exchange tired horses for fresh ones, receive supplies, and continue swiftly onward. Recognizing the economic benefits of reliable infrastructure, Ogedei allowed merchants to access this network. Authorized travelers carried a gereg, also called a Paiza, a passport-like tablet made of wood, iron, silver, or gold. The material signified the bearer's rank and dictated what provisions they could access at each station. This system facilitated trade and movement, but it also placed a burden on local communities, which were expected to provide supplies and animals to support the relay stations. Unsurprisingly, this occasionally led to exploitation by corrupt merchants or commanders. To further improve trade routes, Ogedei ordered the construction of fortified wells, road improvements, security patrols, and bridges. His goal was to encourage more merchants to travel into Mongol territory, offering safety and logistical support. However, he also recognized the need for a permanent administrative and diplomatic centre. The Khan's whereabouts had once been uncertain. Chu Chuji's legendary journey from China to Afghanistan to meet Genghis Khan underscored the inefficiency of such a system. In 1235, Ogedei addressed this by ordering the construction of Karakorum, the first true capital of the Mongol Empire. While Genghis Khan may have considered the idea, the implementation was Ogedei's own. Genghis Khan's earlier base, Avaga, located near the Kurlan River in northeastern Mongolia, appears to have functioned more as a treasure depot and diplomatic holding site than a true capital. Archaeological evidence from Avaga is limited. 2 large mounds have been uncovered and speculated to be palace foundations, possibly one for Genghis and one for Ogedei. However, these were likely modest structures surrounded by yurts rather than walled compounds. Intriguingly, the site remained a religious centre for decades, with thousands of animal bones discovered there, evidence of large-scale sacrificial rituals. This has led some to theorise that the mounds may have been temples rather than palaces, serving as a spiritual memorial to Genghis Khan. Although Genghis may not have objected to the idea of a capital, it seems he saw such sites primarily as logistical hubs. However, some historical sources, including Yuan dynasty chronicles like the Yuan Shi, claim that Genghis founded Karakorum in 1220. This is unlikely, as he spent that year campaigning in Khwarezm. He did pass through the Orkhon Valley in 1219, where Karakorum would eventually rise. The valley's natural wealth, ample water, rich grasslands for livestock, and a central location within Mongolia made it ideal. It was also historically significant. The Uyghur Empire had once established its capital, Karabalgasun, nearby, and the ruins known as Ordu Balik are located just 30 kilometers north of Karakorum's future site. The region also hosts the famous Orkhon inscriptions, early Turkic monuments that underscore the valley's symbolic importance. For the Mongols, asserting dominance over this historic heartland of the steppe reinforced their emerging imperial identity. Even if Genghis identified the site, there's little evidence he initiated any construction. It was Ogedei who transformed the Orkhon Valley into the political and administrative heart of the empire. Over the next 3 decades, Karakorum would serve as the nexus of Mongol governance across Eurasia. Though modest in size, around 10,000 inhabitants by the 1250s, Karakorum was a cosmopolitan city divided into 4 quarters and enclosed by a low wall. It boasted an extraordinary religious and cultural diversity. Mosques, Christian churches, and Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist temples stood side by side. Specialized markets served merchants from the Islamic world, while Chinese artisans helped build the imperial palace. Later, captured craftsmen from Europe contributed to the city's embellishment. Among the most famous features was a silver tree designed by a European artisan, equipped with 4 spouts dispensing different alcoholic drinks. The city had its own mint and supported a thriving community of goldsmiths, silversmiths, blacksmiths, and other skilled labourers. Main roads were paved with limestone and reinforced with wood to withstand seasonal freezing and thawing. Beneath the surface, gravel layers improved drainage. A canal brought water into the city, powering water wheels for the smiths and supporting its growing infrastructure. Karakorum never slept. Scribes, translators, and tax clerks crowded its offices, sorting dispatches that raced in on the Yam postal road and drafting new orders for every corner of the empire. Warehouses filled up with silk bolts, coin chests, and cartloads of tribute. Ögedei liked to impress visiting traders by paying double or triple the going rate for their goods. Word spread fast that the long ride to the Mongol capital was worth it. Unlike a wandering camp, the city offered bathhouses, markets, and music to keep travellers occupied between meetings. The steppe soil around Karakorum even sprouted wheat and barley. One chronicle tells of a proud farmer handing the Khan a bunch of locally grown radishes. None of this made the capital self-sufficient. At its height, it swallowed hundreds of wagon loads of grain and meat every single day, an appetite that would later turn into a strategic liability. To Ogedei, the city was mainly an office. Few ethnic Mongols stayed inside the walls for long. Instead, the Great Khan and his court kept moving across the steppe, dropping in only when state business or a ceremony demanded it. Ogedei's favourite base was the Wanangong, the Palace of Eternal Peace, farther east in Mongolia. A fixed capital still made sense. Envoys finally knew where to deliver letters and treasure, and the revival of overland trade gained momentum. Karakorum was not the only urban experiment on the steppe. West of the capital rose Chucai Balasagun, named after Ogedei's shrewd chancellor Chucai, once an Ongud merchant. Thousands of captured Chinese labourers built it as a logistics hub for the Khwarezm campaign, but before long it was churning out food, tools and weapons for the Khan's armies. Ogedei's early years as ruler were breathless. Fresh offensives rippled across Eurasia, a new bureaucracy took shape, and a glittering capital emerged from pasture land. Perhaps unsure he measured up to his formidable father, the new Khan pushed hard to prove himself. Many historians argue that while Genghis won the empire by force, Ogedei forged the institutions that allowed it to last. Yet the drive that fueled his first decade soon ebbed. By 1237 he stepped back from daily government. Surrounded by the finest wines and spirits of Asia, Ogedei turned sampling them into a full-time hobby. Heavy drinking dulled his judgment, corruption seeped through the ministries, and real authority drifted to his second wife, Turagena Khatun. Reformers like Yelu Chucai and Mahmud Yalavak found themselves edged aside. In a future episode, we'll dig into the later phase of Ogedei's reign, examining the flaws that began to slow the empire's momentum. Before that, though, the coming installments will track the Mongol armies he unleashed, starting with their systematic annihilation of the Jin Dynasty. From the smouldering cities of North China, the narrative then shifts westward, following the same cavalry columns as they thunder across the steppes towards the very edge of medieval Europe. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the history of the Mongols. If you could please take a moment of your time to like the video, subscribe and leave a comment for me, as it helps to get this series out to a broader audience. Thank you, and see you all next time.